Hello, welcome to part two of 1967-1968 America's War in Vietnam lecture. So we left off with the Tet Offensive going on. Now we are to the fighting that is going to happen at a city farther up in the north, in the south, the battle over the city of Hue. So two North Vietnamese regiments moved into Hue on January 31st. Three more divisions are going to come in support later on with the fighting. Now this moves into a totally different style of fighting than what is typically pictured when one thinks of the Vietnam War. This is street style fighting. And the main fighting happens at the center of the city at a place that is called the Citadel. This is a 2 square mile fortress with 30 feet high walls and that are 20 feet thick. 8 battalions of U.S. Marines and troops from the 1st Cavalry Division and 11 South Vietnamese battalions were needed to retake the city and to fight for this. And one place I would never want it to be would be in the Citadel at Hue. Now, while all of this was going on and the Tet Offensive was going on, my father was stationed in Vietnam. And throughout the entire fighting, whenever he could call back home and talk to his mother, my grandmother, she would always ask him, "Are you in Hue? Are you anywhere close to Hue?" Because he was in the Air Force and he was getting transferred between different bases. He served at 5 different bases in his time in Vietnam. And my grandmother was always scared because that was the main talk at the news at night, that he would be sent away or a place close by. Now, the United States Army is going to suffer 74 deaths with the fighting, with 507 wounded soldiers, and the U.S. Marines are going to lose 142 soldiers, with 857 also being wounded. The South Vietnamese, fighting right alongside the Americans, are going to lose 384 and 1,830. Now, this is the battle that just keeps on going after the Tet Offensive main fighting is all over with. So this is why this place continues to get the news attention and other attention that other places do not. Now, for the North Vietnamese with the fighting, they have around 5,000 dead and countless more wounded in this battle alone. And so, from the American perspective that keeps looking at the body count, they can go and skew the figures of this all they want by saying, look at, there's 5,000 dead and we didn't lose way. However, in the grand scheme of things, the Tet Offensive was very damaging to the morale of America, and it really showed the power that the North still had for fighting. They weren't over and done with, like what we kind of assumed was going to happen, that they had reached this point where they would not be able to get more troops for supplies and bring in what they needed in the South, and that they would eventually kind of dwindle down in their fighting. But no, here they launched a major offensive. Yes, the Tet Offensive does not take the U.S. Embassy. It does not take Saigon. Saigon does not fall. And these other cities do not fall. However, in terms of morale for America, it is devastating. Um, right shortly after the Tet Offensive, we have the black moment here, the dark moment in American history, with the massacre that's going to happen at My Lai. My Lai is located in a place where they were calling it Pinkville, this location where they said there were a lot of communist or communist sympathy going on in this area. And so an American company moves into My Lai under the leadership of William Calley. And they're on a search and destroy mission. They're trying to search out communists and, handle what they can. When the Americans showed up, they did not find any Viet Cong or evidence of them. All they find in this village are old men and women and children eating breakfast. They're just walking into people's lives as they're going on. However, William Calley has the villagers rounded up into groups as troops then go through their homes. A few weapons are found. This is not out of the ordinary in a rural area. Think about America. If you go into rural America and you randomly go house to house to house and search for weapons or for anything, I bet you're going to find some guns, especially hunting guns. And so with this, Callie goes and orders his troops to execute the people, all of them, all of the old men, old women, and the children. More than 500 people are going to be slaughtered, including young girls and women who are also raped and mutilated before being killed. 56 infants alone are going to be killed. An American helicopter pilot saw what was going on, and he flew his helicopter down in between the American troops that were shooting at them and civilians to just try to stop the killing. Another soldier recounts seeing a 3 or 4 year old age boy standing with this gaze of utter confusion and loss, and he had a bullet hole in him. And the soldier just looked at him in shock also about what was going on. And then another American soldier picked up his gun and shot and killed that young boy right there. Just killed him. This is a massacre that is absolutely horrendous and horrible. It's also one that the American military is going to try their hardest to cover up. The U.S. Army is going to be able to cover it up for about a year before it's reported in the American press, and it's going to be sparking protests and other things. The soldiers that are going to be involved, I'm going to be talking about this in the next PowerPoint when we are in next year, the 1968-69 PowerPoint. The soldiers are going to be mainly getting set free. 14 officers are going to be charged, but all but one of them acquitted, William Calley. But Calley was found guilty, sentenced to life. But Nixon goes and steps in, and he is a free man by 1974. Um, so this massacre is something that is also going to then spur on the protest movements in America and really give the American troops this horrible image in the United States. It is something that kind of twists the image of America. Yes, some horrible things happened in Vietnam, but a whole bunch of soldiers simply went over because one, they were drafted, or because they felt that they were going to probably be drafted and wanted to kind of pick where they were, picking the Air Force, picking the Marines, or they did have a love for their country, or they did want to authentically stop communism, whatever the reason is. You have troops that went over there and acted honorably their entire time they were there. But then coming back to America, there's so many people that then go and target them and look at them like the killers at My Lai. So March 22nd, 1968, Khe Sanh is hit by a massive barrage of over 1,000 rounds targeting the base. Sensors around Khe Sanh showed troop movement all over around it. And on April 8th, Americans go in and do their spurge of troops, and they retake the highway. By June of 1968, Khe Sanh would be abandoned and destroyed by the Americans. So after the whole battle, after LBJ says do not lose Khe Sanh at all costs, and everything, all the troops lost. Eventually, America does what it keeps doing, and it abandons the position. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated outside of a Memphis hotel. News of King's murder, of course, sparks riots throughout the United States. The day before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he stated, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." This, again, with the Tet Offensive, with My Lai, even though a lot of people don't know about it yet, the Martin Luther King death, and what is also going to be coming up here is the Robert F. Kennedy death, is going to just bring America to such a low point in 1968. We have the student protests that are rising up and rising up and rising up. On April 23rd, several hundred students started a protest at Columbia University in New York City. The protest lasted weeks, and students occupied several buildings on campus. They took over the campus. New York City police were eventually called in. And this is when we start to see the police beating and arresting hundreds of protesters in the demonstration. And this is where we have people that are, confused about what's going on. What kind of America is this? But also in 1968, protests are spreading around the world. We have protests in Czechoslovakia. France has a lot of protests going on. It's Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia. And so this is kind of permeating around the world, all for various reasons. Like I just mentioned, on June 5th, 1968, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, won the California primary and spoke to a large crowd at the Ambassador Hotel in LA. But when he was leaving the building, he was assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan because he had supported Israel during the Six-Day War. And like I said before, this is just one event that keeps bringing America to a lower and lower point. Then we have the Democratic National Convention going on. August 26th through the 29th in Chicago. Representatives go to the DNC. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson has said, he is the president, he is a Democrat, that he is not going to seek reelection at this point. And it seemed like RFK was going to be the person, but he has obviously been assassinated. So now Vice President Humphrey was the likely Democratic nominee, but he supported the war in Vietnam. So thousands of students, anti-war activists, Black Panther protesters, and other groups went to Chicago to protest. Now, Mayor Daley had plenty of police presence to make sure the demonstrators would not get to the convention. But what he didn't think about was all the hotels that the people at the convention would eventually have to go to, and the other locations that you would just naturally need to go to if you are showing up to a city for a convention. And so the protests get violent. Police and protesters clash while TV cameras film as police pull out batons and are hitting protesters. Protesters are hitting back. Yes, do we have some peaceful protests in some areas? Yes, we do. Do we have do we have violent protests? Yes, we do, going on the entire time of this DNC convention. Daley said he had it all under control, but he didn't. Jumping back to Vietnam, we have Operation Rolling Thunder. The Johnson administration ended the bombings on November 1st, 1968. It was supposed to be a gesture for a chance at peace negotiations that never happened in this time. Now, we do have continued talk about peace and continued talk of sitting down at the table to try to hammer things out, but it just continues to prove elusive for all sides. After the chaos of the DNC and then the entire presidential election on November 5th, 1968, Richard Nixon wins the election for the presidency. He continually advocated for the U.S. to get out of the war throughout his campaign, and that is the thing that pushes him into winning his candidacy and becoming the next president of the United States. So this is it for the 1967-68 presentation. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.